bills. Mr Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his contribution. The Labour Party will be supporting this legislation, which is good legislation. This sort of housekeeping or administrative legislation generally goes through with cross-party support. And it ought not to be seen as being insignificant legislation because it isn't contentious. It is actually very contentious, very important legislation, despite not being contentious. I want to mention a couple of aspects. Can I agree and congratulate the government on proper process in respect of the supplementary order paper that's laid on the table for so long, and really once this goes out and is advertised, submitters will have an appropriate period to become properly aware of these complex issues and to submit upon them in a way that is appropriate. And I think that I want to make that congratulations to the government, because I'm also at times critical when that doesn't happen. This is an occasion when it is being done properly, and the government ought to be congratulated for it, because through this we get good legislation and we actually make our country run better than otherwise is the case. I think that I'm also pleased with these changes that are being made to make more or less prescriptive the accounting requirements for smaller companies. I think that for too long in New Zealand we've driven compliance costs, and we often hear accountants opining on the radio that the biggest problem in economic performance is compliance costs, when the difficulty of complying with their standards has actually been one of the biggest drivers of cost for small businesses, having to comply with accounting standards that are more technical and more complex than is necessary, having regard to the nature of their business, the size of their business, the ownership structure of their business. So I'm pleased that we're actually removing the necessity to meet all of the accounting standards that apply to larger corporates in respect of smaller entities, and that in place we're going to have practical guidelines produced as to what are necessary accounts for taxation purposes, which is nonetheless, there needs to be proper accounting so that we can properly assess whether people are paying their tax, but they don't need to be as expensive and complex as the financial reporting standards would have in respect of larger entities. I think that's a very important change, and it's one that I wholeheartedly support. In fact, I've called for that for a while personally. In respect of the issue as to the obligation to have financial reporting for issuers, whether it's issuers of debt or equity instruments, I think we have to take care around this that we don't over-regulate this space also. I've said this previously, and we'll be looking at this legislation to make sure that we're going in the right direction in respect of this. For example, if you are an issuer, or have been an issuer, for how long does this obligation last? Should it last forever? I don't think it should last forever.
Securities have been issued.
What's that?
For as long as the securities are.
Well, the securities last forever. If it's an equity security, if the equity security is issued and it's forever out there, this company, I don't think, should necessarily have legislatively a higher audit and accounting framework than the shareholders might themselves want. So I don't see why, after a period of years, that can't revert to being just an ordinary company that faces lower compliance costs. So I don't agree with. I don't agree that should carry on forever. Issuer audits are expensive. Meeting accounting standards as technical as they have become is expensive, and I don't think in all cases where you have an issuer of raising money from the public that they should have to go through those compliance hoops forever. So that's something that I want to look at Select Committee, or the Labour members on the Select Committee to look at. Mr Speaker, I also want to check whether the quorum rules that are going to apply for opting out of some of these arrangements, if a charity requires a certain percentage of votes in order to avoid the more complex requirements, is that a quorum of those who attend a properly called meeting, or is it a percentage of all of the members of the charity? Because if it's the latter, it will be an impossible quorum requirement to meet. And we've got these problems in respect of management of Maori land at the moment. We ought not to be extending those impossible to meet quorum requirements to other areas. So I think that's another area that the Select Committee should be checking. noting those matters which we need to check on as to detail, I think this is good legislation. I think it is timely to remove some of the complexity that we have through having different accounting rules apply to different entities, not because of they're different in principle, but because the legislation under which they operate was passed in different years. That it's necessary to tidy that up. As I've already said, I think it's also desirable that we remove compliance costs for entities that don't have to take the more complex route. And I also think that it's timely to review the processes that are going to apply to other entities that are not covered by this legislation but are covered by the supplementary order paper that the Minister referred to.
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member. The time has come for me to leave the chair for the dinner break. This debate is interrupted. I shall resume the chair at 7:30.